Hello, my name is John Lampin, and I'm a representative of the Daily Herald. And we're about to begin an interview today in the 14th Congressional District between Congresswoman Lauren Underwood, the the Democratic incumbent, and her Republican challenger, Jim Martyr of Oswego, who is a member of the library board there and a longtime chairman of the Kendall County Republican Organization. And we'll begin our questioning today with Congresswoman Underwood. There are a whole variety of different issues that we could talk about today, more than we're going to be able to get to. So we'd like to start by asking, what do you see as the primary issue in this campaign?
Well, John, thanks for having us this morning. I have been really honored to serve as the representative in the 14th District for 3 terms and remain focused on meeting the needs of residents of the 14th District. In this election, we are focused on lowering costs for working families in our communities. I've been hearing from a lot of folks who do acknowledge the larger economic gains that we've seen with the record job creation, 16 million new jobs since President Biden took office, record low unemployment, and yet too many families, working families, are struggling to meet the rising costs of everyday goods and services, gas, groceries, housing. And so we've been taking action in the Congress. As you know, I'm a registered nurse and have focused a lot of my work on lowering out-of-pocket healthcare costs. And so what we've done is wrote a bill called the Healthcare Affordability Act that was signed into law. It expands really popular tax credits, makes them more generous, available to more Americans. And now we've seen record low uninsurance rates, the lowest in US history, in fact. And so really proud of this work that we've done, not only to lower health coverage costs, but also prescription drug costs. $35 insulin for seniors on Medicare, capping prescription drug costs to just $2,000 a year beginning in January. We're really focused on meeting the needs of people in the 14th District, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Thank you. Mr. Martyr.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Jim Martyr. I'm honored to be the Republican nominee for U.S. Congress here in the 14th Congressional District. I was also honored to be a Trump delegate for the 14th Congressional District as well. So my wife, Jill, and I, we've raised our children in the 14th Congressional District in Oswego. We have 4 children. We have 4 grandchildren. I served on the Scouts in Oswego Troop 63 for 15 years. Both with the beginning of my oldest son, who became an Eagle Scout, and my last son, who was long out while I was still serving there. But and protecting and expanding our children's knowledge and understanding of our government, of our lives, and what it's like to be an American. I mean, those types of organizations are fundamental to me. But number one, right now, what our problem is, we need to stop the invasion and secure the border. So this has been huge. The last 4 years, over 18 million people have illegally entered the United States, and it's time to stop. I mean, they've literally been ushered in at the border, picked up, and sent on buses throughout the district or throughout the nation, right? And in our district, in the township of Joliet in December of last year, J.B. Pritzker tried to drop a grant on them to house migrants. 300 plus people in Joliet Township showed up and they said, no, we're not taking your money, because they know the impact on local police. They know the impact on our schools. They know impact on our health services. They know the impact on our food pantries. They said no. So JB wasn't good enough for him. So he had to waltz that on over to Joliet City. And guess what? The city of Joliet said no in both cases. People came out, the leaders of our towns in our districts right here in the 14th district said no, stop the invasion, stop the illegal migration that's coming into the United States. Number 2, end inflation, promote prosperity. It is high time we stop the spending in Washington. Congresswoman Underwood has voted for every big budget-busting spending bill in her entire career in Washington, and so has most of the rest of folks, both Democrats and Republicans. I will be one who will not be doing that. We need to stop the waste, fraud, and abuse, stop the spending of things that don't belong in our budget in Washington, D.C. These are pretty much the 2 paramount issues to me. But then we have radical education and we have indoctrination going on in our public schools. We need to stop the federal funding of all that. We need to protect parents' rights in our schools. Our parents' rights are being trampled. We've got people that want to indoctrinate their kids, but they want to do it privately and secretly. That's going on in our public schools, including right here in Oswego, right? We need to stop that stuff. We need to defend our medical freedom. During the COVID lockdowns, we were told what we had to do. I would think as a nurse, Congresswoman Underwood would agree with me that the politicians shouldn't be telling you what to do with your health, whether or not you should choose or not to get a vaccination. Those things matter to me. The individual liberty and those kind of choices matter to me, and it should matter to everybody, right? And the next thing is really defending our Constitution and our Second Amendment 100%. These are issues when we have people who can't defend themselves and they can't equalize the playing field, like the woman who actually taught me my concealed carry class to get my upping of it. She defends herself, and she knows personally because she's been on that other end of that spectrum where she was one of those people who could not defend herself from someone, and then she became an instructor. And I think it's important that we defend that 100% all the time.
Okay, thank you. I think you did priority times 5 there, and we definitely are going to get into some of these issues. Why don't we start, Mr. Martyr, with inflation? What do you think the cause is of the inflation that we've experienced for the past 3 or 4 years, and what actions do you think have helped to bring it down?
Well, when you open the printing presses in Washington, D.C. and spend money we actually don't have. I mean, we're at 35 trillion in debt. You know, when I started engaging in politics, and I'm the newbie here, right? It's like about 8-9 years ago, local election in Oswego. And, you know, on the national scene, I think our debt was about 20 trillion. I thought it was way too much then, right? I mean, it's insane that we're into the 35 trillion dollars of debt. I studied economics at Purdue University, and I can tell you one thing: government spending does not reduce inflation. So when you put $2 trillion and you call it the Inflation Reduction Act, you are not reducing inflation, okay? It's just simple economics, common sense. We have to stop the spending. We have to stop the madness in Washington, D.C. Everybody in the world doesn't need a handout, and especially the 18 million illegals who are coming into the country.
Okay. Congresswoman Underwood, your views on inflation.
We know that the pandemic caused some significant strain, not just on the US economy, but economies around the world. And so the global inflation that we did see really began under President Trump. As we know, the pandemic began in 2020 with his leadership, his failed leadership of managing the pandemic. And so when President Biden took office, we did vote for the American Rescue Plan to help communities, states across the 14th district, small businesses, to make sure that we were holding on to jobs and keeping schools open, and making sure that life could continue forward for our community. Since that time, the most recent data tells us that inflation, in fact, has come down back to those levels last seen in like January, February 2021. So the efforts on the federal level have been successful in reducing inflation by the metric. However, there are too many families in our community that are still struggling with high costs of goods and services. And so part of that is corporate price gouging. We've seen a phenomenon called shrinkflation, where costs are rising while consumers are getting increasingly fewer products for that same good. So think of a box of cereal that might have been 24 ounces and is now 18 ounces, but costs, 25% more than it did prior to the pandemic. That's what I'm talking about with this shrinkflation. And so I think that there's an opportunity as we move forward to continue to hold these corporations accountable for their reckless, greedy price gouging. I also think we have to remain laser focused on taking action to lower costs for the American people. Things like tackling housing. There are too many folks in our community who cannot find an affordable apartment. Rent is too high, and we have great proposals that Speaker Mike Johnson will not bring to the floor for a vote that would support our renters. We have an opportunity to help people with their down payment to purchase a home in our community. People want to live in the 14th district. We have great schools. We are a great community, but the cost of housing is preventing too many people who want to be in our community from having an opportunity to do so. That's just one example. I think another opportunity that we have to lower costs for families is to bring back the expanded child tax credit, which was so successful during the pandemic in lowering child poverty. Across the country, we saw child poverty cut in half because we expanded a tax credit to help working families, right? There's an opportunity as we continue forward to focus our policies on helping working people in our community, and that's the work that I'm committed to doing.
Okay. I'd like to follow up a little bit on this issue and just play devil's advocate with both of you. And so with Mr. Martyr, I guess the question would be, do you think what do you think about the role of supply and demand in terms of inflation? Do you recognize that it was inflation has been a global issue, and the argument that there's restricted during the pandemic, there's restricted supply and pent up demand that kind of burst after the pandemic. Your thoughts about
well, first of all, there's no doubt about it was a global issue. I'm amused that President Trump caused the pandemic when it was the CCP Communist China Party released the virus out of Wuhan. But okay, but at any rate, look. Supply and demand didn't cause inflation, okay? We had huge supply chain problems. By the way, I work for America's industry. I've been doing it for 35 years. I'm a software consultant, but I work in American companies that make American products and have plants and businesses around the world. So I've traveled the world, I've traveled the country, and I've also worked all over the state of Illinois, from the Chicago area to the Western Illinois, all the way down to the southern part of Illinois. So I work with manufacturing companies who make American products, and I walk factory lines with American workers. And I'm telling you this, it's like when the government, both the state of Illinois, by the way, that there's inflation caused by the states, like out of control budgets like they just passed in Springfield, which we don't have it covered for. That's kind of a joke, but that's contributing to it. But when you have that combined with the federal spending, again, $35 trillion in debt, we haven't had a balanced budget in God knows how long, maybe my entire lifetime. And it's this is what's causing it. And you can't get around that fact, right? It's government spending causing it. So you don't solve inflation. You don't solve housing crisis. By the way, my daughter's one of the ones that is not happy about the housing prices, right? She's out of college, she's doing her job, and she's like, I can't really afford anything. I agree with her. And here's the thing, we've got an exodus in Illinois of over 1 million people of Illinois, and yet prices are going up in Illinois. There's something going on. That is an economic anomaly. I don't have the answers for that, but it's not going to be solved by throwing money around, printing more money in Washington, D.C., and giving loans to people who probably can't afford it, probably can't pay it back, and will probably default on it, right? We tried that in the early 2000s. It didn't work. We created a housing bubble and we burst the economy. So let's not do that again, okay?
Okay. Okay. Congresswoman Underwood, would you agree that government spending plays a role in the inflation that we've had?
I believe that during the pandemic, it was the responsible thing to do to support struggling small businesses through successful programs like the Paycheck Protection Program that enabled small businesses to keep their staff and to keep people employed. I think it's a responsible thing to do to support states and communities who needed to respond in a global pandemic. And we saw those resources being put to good use throughout the 14th district to keep people safe, to keep our essential workers, our public service people, our law enforcement, our first responders on the job, to keep these essential services going. That is where the federal dollars were put to use across the 14th district. And so I think I voted for those bills, and I certainly think that that was the right thing to do during that time of a crisis. President Biden has been so clear that in order to have a solid recovery, we needed to be really focused on the investments that we made. And so, as Mr. Martyr pointed out, I did vote for the Inflation Reduction Act, which is legislation that allowed us to lower out-of-pocket costs for the American people on key healthcare issues. This is the bill that allows 4 out of 5 consumers to purchase a healthcare plan for $10 or less a month. It's a bill that I wrote. The Healthcare Affordability Act was included in the Inflation Reduction Act. And as a result, we have seen record numbers of people signing up for healthcare coverage. 21 million Americans signed up for coverage, and we had the lowest number of uninsured Americans in history. Also included in that bill was $35 insulin for seniors on Medicare, access to a life-saving medication that had become out of reach for our seniors who are living on a fixed income. Also in that bill was a provision that allows seniors on Medicare to truly afford their prescription drugs, capping those drugs at $2,000 a year. That begins this upcoming January. So when I think about the investments that we made during a time of crisis, my focus was looking out for the people of 14th District, making sure that we were always taking action to lower costs, to protect our community, to make sure people had the essential services that they needed to survive. And I think we were successful.
Okay, thank you. Let's go back now also to the immigration issue, which certainly is the polls show is on a lot of people's mind. And we'll start with Congresswoman Underwood. Really kind of general views on both of you on your views on immigration. Why have we seen such an influx across our border in the last 3-4 years? What should we have learned from the experience? Are those migrants, as Donald Trump has suggested, largely rapists, murderers, vagrants, and from mental institutions and drug traffickers? Do you support pathways to citizenship, dreamers, mass deportation? Your views, Congresswoman.
Well, since America's founding, immigrants have been vital to our cultural vibrancy, to our economic success. Immigrants make up large, really robust communities in the 14th District, and our immigration system must honor the value and dignity and humanity of all of our immigrant communities. Language like we hear from former President Trump is disgusting. It does not reflect our shared values as Americans, and it's really very divisive. And it does not reflect the kind of leadership that we need to hold on the global stage. Now, without a doubt, our immigration system is deeply broken, and we need comprehensive immigration reform that secures our borders, that protects our workers. We need comprehensive immigration reform that will keep families together and offer immigrants a pathway to citizenship. So in the Congress, I supported bipartisan legislation like the Dream and Promise Act that offers those young people who were brought here by their parents at a young age, who've been educated here, who in many cases are working here, offers them a pathway to citizenship. I voted for bipartisan legislation like the Farm Worker Modernization Act, which our farmers and agricultural-based businesses are desperate for in the 14th because it allows them access to the skilled workers that they rely on. In the 14th District, if our rural economy is not strong, our larger economy in our community isn't strong. We have to have the workers to supply this key industry in our community. I think that it's been disgusting what we've seen from red state governors, extremists like Greg Abbott of Texas, who have been, inhumanely busing migrants from border communities into cities like New York, Chicago, Denver, Los Angeles, in many cases against their will, and creating chaos in so many cities. It's a reflection of how deeply broken the system is. But President Biden took action. President Biden pulled together a bipartisan group of senators and negotiated a really tough border bill. And President Trump got scared. President Trump saw the progress that was being made and called the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and said, do not bring that bill for a vote. President Trump killed the bill. That is unacceptable, cutting off an opportunity for skilled workers in this economy in the 14th District. And so now we've seen President Biden take action, through executive action that he has authority to do, border crossings have dropped in recent months by 50%. So the executive action is working, but we still need comprehensive reform, and only the Congress can do that. I hope that we have a leader in the next Congress, like Kamala Harris as president, like Hakeem Jeffries as speaker, who are willing to tackle the tough issues and bring these bills for a vote. And I look forward to having an opportunity to vote for legislation on the floor of the House.
Mr. Martyr.
So a lot to unpack there. So first of all, I didn't know President Trump was in Congress and he could vote on a bill, but that's okay. But that's interesting. Take on that the leadership in Congress on both sides and the members didn't have control over what was going to be voted on and what legislation hit the floor, because that's what Congress does. Look, I support a constitutional immigration process, right? But we need to stop the invasion, build the wall, secure the border. We need to enforce existing immigration law. We don't need new laws here, folks. I mean, I'm not sure why everyone thinks they're the smartest person in the room in Washington and thinks we need to change everything. How about we enforce the existing immigration law? How about we have E-Verify? How about we end LBJ's chain migration policies? I mean, no other country in the world does this, by the way. Nobody else in the world opens their borders and lets people pour in, okay? The problem here, and look, we're talking about, and President Trump didn't say every person coming across is what the left is saying in the media, okay, folks? What he said was, there are certainly criminals, there are certainly gang members. The immigration process right now is being controlled by cartels and gangs, right? This is essentially what's going on. We're allowing it, we're funding it, we're giving money to NGOs, we're giving money and cash cards at the other end of the, let's say, the migration chain down in Central South America. They're setting them up, they're bringing them through the process, they're bringing them here at the cost of their own lives in many cases. You go to the border towns, you know how many dead people there are in the counties in Texas on the border? I know for a fact, and this was years ago, in Brown County, Texas, there were over 400 unidentified people in graves in unmarked graves in Brown County. And that was like from 2014. Since then, the numbers have skyrocketed. You know, they're putting people through essentially, they're essentially victims of the process here. And if we don't stop this, the whole thing's a humanitarian nightmare. If we don't stop this, it's on us for what's happening to these people as they're coming through the process. But we need to tell them, stop. Do not come here unless you're going to come and apply through the legal process. Apply from your country, get in line, and do the process the right way. We need to shut it down, folks. And this is one thing it's number one for me, right? If you didn't get it from my opening statement, it's number one. If we don't solve this crisis, we don't have a country, and everybody knows that. The workers in Illinois, the workers in the 14th district, they know that. I'm out there talking to them every day. Number one issue. I knocked on a door in Ottawa, I was talking to a first generation immigrant. His wife was a first generation immigration immigrant. And they're telling me, you know what their number one issue was? And I was just like casual chatting. I said, what's your issue? I didn't tell them what mine were. I wanted to hear from them. They said, number one is stop this. We came the legal way and we're tired of it, right? That's what immigrants are saying. First generation immigrants are saying in the 14th district. They're tired of it. That's what the people of Joliet said when they told J.B. Pritzker, no, don't drop 20,000 migrants here like they did in Ohio, right? Don't do that stuff. It has an impact on the communities. We need to stop it. Nobody else in the world is doing it. Look, I get it. We have the greatest country on God's earth. That's why people want to come here, but we need to do it the right way.
Jim, thank you. If I could just ask you, Mr. Martyr, to clarify, you said that we don't need new laws. Does that mean you would oppose this bill that had come up earlier? Say this bill gets back to the House after the election. Would you oppose that bill, or would you consider voting for it?
I honestly, I'd have to look at the details of that bill. Based on what I know at a high level, I would stand against that particular bill. There was a bill before that should have passed that didn't pass either, by the way. And but I don't know the details of that particular bill. But when I'm talking about laws, I'm talking about the criminal code laws, the immigration laws type stuff, the things I mentioned. Well, there are some things we do need to change, but what I'm saying is we don't need to pile one set of laws on the other. I mean, this is called over-regulation, burdensome stuff. On the border stuff, we need to protect American citizens, right? So we have too much immigration law, so to speak, like LBJ's chain migration policies, right? We need to end that stuff. Nobody else does it. So again, what I'm talking about is not piling on and creating more law just to create law, but it needs to be part of what I would consider a constitutional law, enumerated powers in the Constitution. If it's not given to us in Congress to do it, stop doing it, right? Eliminate the laws, cut the size and scope of the federal government. That's what my mission, and I'm going to be relentless about this. My mission will be to cut the size and scope of the federal government. So we're doing way too many things, and it's causing all of these problems in inflation, in the economy, in workers, in the high and soaring cost of healthcare. By the way, healthcare cost is not going down. I've been living the nightmare from Obamacare ever since it passed, and I can tell you, I can show you the bills. I have all my bills. I can show them to anyone who wants to see them. We have a huge problem with skyrocketing healthcare costs. It's not coming down. And oh, by the way, when you eliminate the private insurance market, guess what? People are going to have to sign up for federal programs because they have no other choices, right? We need to free the market back up there.
Okay, thank you. Congresswoman Underwood, Mr. Martyr kind of digressed into health coverage and that kind of thing. So if you have some comments on that before we move on.
Well, just a few comments. Thanks, John, for the opportunity. So number one, it is a fact that Donald Trump called Mike Johnson, told Mike Johnson not to put the bill on the floor. Mike Johnson followed the instructions. Donald Trump killed the bill. That is a fact. It has been published many times in multiple reputable papers. And if Jim Martyr does not want to accept those facts, that's on him. But that did occur. That's number one. Number two.
Well, come on. All I said was he wasn't in Congress. He didn't have to follow Trump's instruction if he didn't want.
John, it was my understanding I had time to respond. John, you're muted.
Yeah, yes, please do.
Okay, thank you. So that's number one. I think number two, in the Congress, I serve on the Appropriations Committee, which means that we are responsible for funding the federal government every year. I serve on the Homeland Security Subcommittee, which means we're responsible for funding the agencies that run our immigration system: Customs and Border Protection, U.S. Border Patrol, ICE, which is Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, USCIS. All of those different agencies are within our jurisdiction. And in the most recent federal funding package, we were able to come together on a bipartisan basis and increase federal funding for these key border security agencies by 10%. We could do that on a bipartisan basis. And so I know that bipartisan agreement is possible. I know that the Congress can come together and tackle these hard challenges like reforming our immigration system. But what I want to emphasize is that you heard Jim Martyr say a lot of words. He did not have an actual plan, certainly rejected the bipartisan work that has been done, and he did not offer one that solves the challenges in the 14th District, which must include a pathway to citizenship. And so the work that I have done has been bipartisan. It offers that pathway to citizenship, and I am committed to doing this work with the urgency that this challenge deserves. And I remain very optimistic that we can get a bipartisan bill through the Congress. We could have done it this year. Donald Trump killed the bill. I look forward to doing it next year in 2025.
John, I have a follow-up question if I could.
Please do.
Thank you. And this is for Jim first. Jim, in your introduction, you were talking about immigration, and this question is about immigration. You were talking about immigration, and you criticized or complained about the governors busing migrants all over the country. That primarily was the work of a Republican governor in Texas, and the Republican governor of Florida was flying migrants around the country. Um, do you, your opponent in this race, Lauren Underwood, called that disgusting. What are your thoughts on what those two governors did with the migrants that had crossed into their states? And should they have done something differently with those immigrants?
Well, they should have turned them back, except the problem is that's not their purview. That's the immigration control from the federal government, right? So since the federal government wasn't doing its job, and look, I heard a report from Congresswoman Underwood and from some state reps here in Illinois where they went to the border and they watched what was happening. There are holes in the fence, the border wall that President Trump and the Republicans built, and they're literally letting people walk through these, and we're talking like mass immigration, right, happening in real time. They bring them over to a fence line, which is supposed to be there so that, you know, people don't cross illegally, right? They make them strip down, they put robes on them, they put them on a bus, and they take them somewhere to the interior. Okay, so if the federal immigration wasn't doing that, the governors in Texas and Florida, which are, you know, front line on the immigration line, they wouldn't have to do anything. Now, let's back that up. Now, let's say you're the governor of Texas, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, and you have more people than you can handle in your state because of this flood of illegal immigration coming into your state at behest of the open border policy of the Biden-Harris administration that Lauren Underwood supports, right? Now, you've got that going on, and you don't have place for all these people. What would you do? You need to send them somewhere else. It's the federal government's problem, right? Now, what I didn't criticize that. If you notice, I criticized what was going on in here when JB wanted to hand out cash into the 14th district to put migrants into the 14th district like they did in Springfield, Ohio, and everywhere else in this country. And in Chicago, I mean, it's horrible, right? And what we're doing with these people, it's horrible. We need to stop it. They need to stay in their own countries for the most part, right? And then the people that meet our requirements to be legal immigrants, let them apply and come the legal way. Look, we're all, you know, every one of us is pretty much a generation of immigrants. My great grandmother came over here from Lithuania in 1915. She just missed. If she had stayed any longer, she wouldn't have made it here. I wouldn't be here, right? So escaping basically what was going to be communism, which was still, tyranny at the time where she left Lithuania, and with what was going on there at that time in 1915, right? My other grandparents on my mother's side came from Poland, same time frame, right? So they all escaped what was going to happen in those countries very eminently in the near time. So no one's against legal immigration following the right process, but this invasion, and it's an invasion, no doubt about it. And it's being funded by NGOs. It's not just us, by the way. We're funding it. You know, we're probably the #1 funder of the United States. We need to stop that, turn the spigot off, save a little money there for the taxpayers, right? But it's the whole world that's funding this. There's a lot of people in the world that don't like us very much. They want this to continue and happen in the United States.
Thank you.
And sorry, I didn't answer your question. Ask me to follow up, but I think I got part.
Okay, Mr. Martyr took a little bit of time with that, so we'll give you, Congresswoman, a brief opportunity to make one more response before we move on.
You heard Jim say a lot of things. I still don't hear a plan. I think,
Yeah, I want to address that comment though, if I may, because I do have a plan. I said build the wall, finish the wall, enforce existing immigration law, no DACA, no amnesty. We don't need a pathway to citizenship for people who came here illegally, folks. We already have a pathway to citizenship. and the practice of birthright citizenship, enforce the border, deport illegal immigrants when they're detained, end catch and release, require law enforcement to report positively IDing people to ICE, end sanctuary cities and states, enforce existing law against employers breaking it, and cap and reduce all immigration levels. That's a plan, by the way. And that's the plan I support. And until we get to that plan, we've got a nightmare going on in this country, and the people in the fort, I mean, they are fed up. I have been from end to end, up and down, all around it, and people are fed up on this issue. It's their number one issue. It's also why it's my number one issue, because the people of the 14th district care about it.
Okay, thank you very much. We're gonna ask that you keep your answers brief so that we can move on to get some other issues. And I would like to shift to another issue, and because another issue that is very prominent on the minds of people is is abortion, and then the controversial Supreme Court ruling on Roe v. Wade. Would you? So we're going to ask both of you, and we'll start with. I'm not sure where we are anymore. We'll start with Congresswoman Underwood. Would you support or oppose legislation to restore Roe v. Wade across the nation, or to enact a national ban on abortion? Question for both of you. We'll start with Congresswoman Underwood.
I'm committed to standing up for working families and defending our freedoms. That includes full reproductive health care, that includes protecting our access to contraception, that includes protecting our access to fertility services like IVF, that includes protecting our right to privacy from surveillance of apps like on our phone, like your period tracking app. I support legislation that would allow Americans to travel across state lines for any purpose, including seeking healthcare, life-saving healthcare that they need. What has happened since Donald Trump appointed justices, overturned the Dobbs decision, or issued the Dobbs decision, overturning Roe v. Wade in the summer of 2022, is every state that borders Illinois has enacted a partial or total ban on abortion. And as a result, people are coming into our community desperately seeking life-saving care, because in some of those states, they are criminalizing women, trying to put women in jail for getting the health care they need, or they're trying to put doctors and nurses into jail for helping patients get the life-saving care that they need. Right now, 1 in 3 women across this country are living in a state that has enacted a partial or total abortion ban. It's half of Black women. And so this is a phenomenon that is so dangerous. We are seeing rising maternal death rates. We are seeing chaos and confusion in our hospitals, people being turned away while bleeding out during medical emergencies. And it doesn't have to be this way in the United States. There is a document. It's called Trump's Project 2025, and it outlines the extreme MAGA Republican plans to control every aspect of our lives. And one of the key tenets is this march towards a nationwide abortion ban. Speaker Mike Johnson supports it. We know Donald Trump supports it. We know Jim Marter supports it. That kind of extremism is dangerous, it's deadly, and we cannot let an extremist like Jim Marter represent us in the 14th district.
Thank you. Mr. Marter.
So I am pro-life. I think the child in the mother's womb, the most innocent of all human beings, deserve to be protected. And you know, this is a commandment from God. It's to protect life. It's to protect the most innocent. And you know, I'm more concerned about my personal salvation than scoring political points with the pro-abortion lobby and activists. I'm concerned with all your salvation too, by the way. You know, my concern is with my fellow human beings that we all. So I go by God's word and God's truth on this. And you know, whether or not, and we all pretty much know that there's no push for anyone to make any moves in Washington. They're all afraid to do just about anything on a lot of things, but this would be the number one thing. But I want to address the fact that your question, you know, I reject the premise of your question. You're like, Donald Trump and the Supreme Court overturned, you know, whatever. Look, that was just like Brown versus Board of Education. It was a bad Supreme Court ruling. I'm against activist Supreme Courts making laws. Okay, laws are the purview of the Congress of the United States of America and the president signing them. Okay, that's it. And the Constitution, and if you don't, and it's all subordinate to our Constitution, which is our primary supreme law. And if you don't like what's in the Constitution, it requires to be done through an amendment process. We've had 20 some odd, 20, 28, 29. I think we just passed one recently that was actually over 100 and some years old. But there is a process to change our laws. You don't like it, you don't get the Supreme Court in 1972 to illegally create law where they had no purview to do that, right? And one of the biggest opponents to the way that was done was Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She talked about this at nauseum. I'm not gonna, I don't have it memorized, but go look it up. She thought that the way that came about was totally wrong. However, she was for it. She was for abortion. She was pro-abortion. So she kept, voting along those lines over the years to protect it. But still, she was one of the people who actually explained to me and to others why that process of creating law where there was none by the Supreme Court is not the way the American. So what the Supreme Court did finally was reverse a decision that was bad, just like Brown versus Board of Education and all the other bad laws that led to slavery and everything else in our country that were eventually overturned by the Supreme Court, right? So this is where we go. And again, I'm not going to apologize for, I was just holding my newest granddaughter the other day, and I was there for the birth of all four of my children. Life of a child is so important. I'm for all the future moms and dads in our district. I'm for helping them keep their babies, save their babies, and raising their babies. So that's where I stand on that issue.
Okay, Mr. Martyr, if I could clarify first, I did not mention Donald Trump. I mentioned only that the ruling was controversial. I did not express any judgment on the ruling, but I would like to clarify.
On that. Yeah,
I would like to clarify. Are you saying that Brown versus the Board of Education was a bad ruling?
You said
I'm talking about the various cases that led to bad rulings in the Supreme Court that led to bad law that were always overturned later on, right?
Yeah.
So,
John.
So, Jim, I have this. Excuse me,
Congressman,
I'm sorry.
Believe that he should control every aspect of a woman's life. You heard him say it. You heard him say it. You cannot let him walk away from what he clearly just said.
Congresswoman, if you could hang on just a second.
Well, actually, I didn't say what she just said. I mean, I know what she's going to say going forward, but I didn't say that.
Jim, excuse me. I had the same question that John just had, which was you referred to but didn't specify that a Supreme Court ruling was a bad ruling. I took it as you were referring to Roe versus Wade. John, it seems like, thinks you were referring to Brown versus Board of Education. So very succinctly, very briefly, when you were talking a few moments ago about a decision by the Supreme Court being a bad ruling, what piece of legislation, what ruling, I'm sorry, were you referring to? You're muted, Jim.
Okay. All right. Am I unmuted now?
Yes, you're good. So what piece of legislation were you referring to when you said, or I'm sorry, not legislation, what Supreme Court ruling were you referring to when you called it a bad Supreme Court ruling?
Well, Roe versus Wade, obviously first, but Brown versus Board of Education was the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. That was the reversal of previous bad decisions, right? So, my example there was we had to have reversals of bad decisions. And we were talking about this one, which was a reversal. So I was referring to a previous reversal that is the example of why the Supreme Court makes bad laws, and often they reverse the bad laws, right?
Okay, so just to clarify, and again, it's really yes or no. you were referring to Roe versus Wade as the bad Supreme Court ruling that had to be reversed. Is that correct?
Yes. And I
Thank
was
you.
using a past example of one that overturned, again, another bad ruling, right?
Okay.
So,
Okay, thank you for clarifying.
yeah.
You also mentioned that you're pro-life, and I just want to clarify for our viewers and for our readers, you're pro-life. Do you believe in any exceptions to that?
Look, I personally don't. I follow God's law, right? So my thing is I would like to be out there to talk to young people to explain to them. Look, my wife and I have been married 39 years. We had our first children, pretty quick when we were a young married couple. And I can tell you this, there's nothing more beautiful and wonderful than for a couple to raise their children, and God's blessings on this world are the children of this world. And it's so sad to me that we kill children with impunity right now. I mean, the numbers are outrageous. Remember when this first was pre-Roe versus Wade, it was supposed to be rare, safe, and legal. Nobody's talking about that. The abortion industry wants more abortions. They're pushing this on people. We're not giving women the right information. So I'll tell you what I am for. I am for having ultrasounds made available to all women seeking an abortion so they can actually see what we're talking about here, right? Let's have them also have the information for how do you get child care and child support, and what organizations. There's great organizational, Abigail Women's Center in LaSalle. We've got wonderful ones all around the district and all around Northern Illinois, pregnancy centers that help young women have their babies, help them raise them, provide them the services and things they need afterwards. So I'm for life. I'm for, I'm more of it. This is less about law and it's more about a personal thing to say to young men and women. I talk to my boys about this too, right? Young men and women, life is precious. Protect life at all costs and do what you can to, have children and raise those children. And whether or not it was unplanned or not, look, I'm like, this is not, God's law doesn't decide whether it's planned or unplanned, right? This has happened throughout human history. So I'm 100% pro-life. I'm not going to apologize for that. I'm not going to kowtow it. I understand very well that my position is not going to pass into law because there's nobody in Congress that'll probably step up with me, right? So it's not about that. It's about where we stand and what we're telling our young people. Do they want to support their life and the mission that God's given them, or do they want to kill their baby? That's basically it, right?
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give Congresswoman Underwood a chance to respond if she likes.
You just heard Jim Martyr articulate all the ways that he wants to control women. He thinks that his faith and his belief should dictate federal law in this country. These decisions should be made by women. Women should have the right to privacy, have the right to bodily autonomy. Women should have agency that is protected under federal law. And that is why I have voted for the Women's Health Protection Act, the legislation that would codify Roe versus Wade into federal law. Now, at the end of the day, these decisions should be made by women. Jim Martyr doesn't want that. You heard all the excuses that he uses to justify his extremism. But what I hear is that he's dangerous. He thinks he should decide what happens. And we cannot let that happen. We cannot let him win.
Okay, we're about running out of time. There's one other question we want to ask, and that's really, are our elections fair and secure? And I want to start with you, Mr. Martyr. In your questionnaire with the Daily Herald, you said there are serious problems with our election systems, election fraud, where cheating by Democrats is historically rampant. What's your evidence for that?
First, I'm going to respond to that. I actually didn't say what Congresswoman Underwood said. So for the record, I did not say I want to control women. I didn't outline any path to controlling women. I'm curious though as to why we think that men aren't involved in creation of babies. So I just want to put it on the record that someone's saying someone else is dangerous and we can't let them get in. I mean, that's really, I mean, that's the kind of rhetoric that's taken to it. We've got 2 assassination attempts against President Trump right now. That's the kind of rhetoric that's causing that. We need to stop that. So, all right, back to your question. Your question was on election fraud, right? So here's the deal. Look,
My question, just to reiterate for both of you, is, are our elections fair and secure? And starting with you, I did want to ask you about your response in our questionnaire, where you said that, you know, there's election systems and election fraud with cheating by Democrats that's historically rampant. And I'm curious what your evidence is for that.
I mean, we don't have to look much farther than Chicago. Look, election fraud comes in many forms. I'll talk to the first one. This is real clear, crystal clear. Everyone can get it. In Illinois, we have 17 congressional districts, and we draw maps to design it so that we don't get equal representation on the state. So 3 out of 17 is 17.6%, right? In the last statewide elections, typically we're seeing about 45 to 55 Republican to Democrat votes, you know, give or take. Some years, like when Rauner won, we had 50, right? So you're looking at the federal representation. Election fraud first is done by gerrymandering of maps, drawing maps so that one party can do that. It's done by both parties, not in Illinois. It's done by one party in Illinois. In other states, it's done by Republicans, right? We need to stop that. All right. Second thing, coercion, okay? Coercion of voters. The Democrat machine, and if you don't think there's one in Chicago, I got some swampland to sell you somewhere else. But look, the Democrat machine is masters of coercion. As I've talked to voters throughout the district over years, being a chairman, knocking on doors, talking to people, I've talked to many former union members who told me specifically that they felt they couldn't vote in a primary because then someone might know they're a Republican, right? And B, they knew that people were watching what they're doing and telling them, you need to do this. Now, can they get into the voting box and do that? But coercion is under Illinois law and presumably under federal law illegal. You cannot, coerce people to vote. So the methods and the things. Let's get to real fraud where we're actually stealing votes. Registering illegal immigrants to vote, or even non-citizens who are not here illegally to vote, which is what Illinois did. You know what we did? We changed state law about 7 times or more over the last 6-7 years, starting with motor voter. Then we said, okay, we're going to give people who come here illegally, we're going to give them driver's license. Then we're going to change the driver's license this last year so that they don't have to be identified as not a citizen. Federal law does say you have to be a U.S. citizen to vote. Lauren Underwood voted against protecting that and ensuring that only U.S. citizens votes. I would vote for that bill. And I'm not even going to get into, like, there's a lot of people that, look, I do computers. I write software for a living. I support software. I'm not going to get into some of the theories about that. I can tell you one thing. I'm a programmer. If I want to write software to cheat, I could do it, and no problem. I also know election law, and I know the election process here in Illinois. And let me count the ways you can cheat. If you had the will and the means to do it, the method is there. That's what all these ballots coming out in mail, it's ripe for fraud. They did it in Traverse City, Michigan. In Wisconsin, they had cases, they just ruled that, there was fraud, but we can't do anything about it. In DuPage County, by the way, we had 1,626 more votes in the ballot boxes than they could track to a person who they checked in to vote. Our process is pretty clear. When you go in to vote, you're on a file, your name is there, and then you vote. We know who voted. We track that, right? Our software does that. I've watched it. I know the software. My wife's an election judge. I can tell you, I don't know how 1,600 ballots showed up in DuPage County in the last election cycle. And I think it was 2020, actually. But I don't know how they showed up there, but somebody put them in there. That's called fraud, folks. And this is what I'm talking about. We need to get secure elections. Let me count the ways, and I don't have enough time to get into all the other ways, but there's dozens and dozens of ways to cheat, and it's in play, and we need to stop it because people are sick of that as well, by the way.
John, before we move on to the Congresswoman's response, I'd like to correct a couple things for viewers. Although you and I and our readers may not like gerrymandering. Gerrymandering isn't fraud. It's the law, and it's been upheld in states. You know, the way maps are drawn. There are a lot of people who would prefer a fair map drawing process, as it's called, but this process has been upheld by the courts, and it isn't election fraud.
Well, that's a matter of opinion, but
it's not prosecutable election fraud. John had asked for specific examples of election fraud, and I'm struck by the fact that you're talking about that the state has registered non-citizens to vote via driver's licenses and motor voter. That just isn't true. There's no evidence of that. Unless you have evidence of that, I have seen no evidence of an effort to get non-citizens or as you said, immigrants to vote via the driver's license process or motor voter efforts in Illinois. I'm asking, do you have evidence?
Look, I mean, the process is set up to allow it. Okay, that's what I said.
Do you
right?
have evidence
The process is look. I'm not a prosecutorial organization, right? If I had the resources, no doubt, right, that it's happening. There's plenty of people out there that have proved it around the country, right? Election fraud is real. It happens. Let's talk about people voting twice in the same election. That's election fraud, right?
Okay, we're going to move on to Congresswoman Underwood, and this is kind of the last. We're out of time, so this is the last response.
Okay.
Congresswoman.
Thank you so much. I want to start out by saying this. This is an opportunity for us to talk to you, John and Russell, but also to talk to the people of the 14th District. And I was taking the opportunity to remind the people of the 14th District that we have an opportunity to vote. Early voting starts in 9 days on September 26th. Okay, I was making no threats. I was inciting no violence. The attempted assassinations on former President Donald Trump are a disgrace. It should never happen. There is no room for political violence in our democracy. And those folks, I mean, the most recent alleged shooter should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. In my role as the ranking member, lead Democrat on the Homeland Appropriations Subcommittee, I've spoken with the Secret Service Director and I'm standing by to support the funding requests needed to make sure that all the candidates, all the protectees have the resources that they need to be safe and to do their work, period. Okay, so any insinuation from Jim Martyr to allege that I am addressing any kind of violence or threats his way is unequivocally not what I said, certainly not my intention. And I just want to be really clear that we have folks heading out to vote in a matter of weeks and that they need to understand the clear differences in my approach and his. With respect to election security, without a doubt, elections are secure in the United States. In 2016, the Russians accessed voter registration files of Illinois voters. And since that time, the Congress has invested billions of dollars in bolstering our election security. We do remain vulnerable to foreign interference in our elections. These social and messages that end up influencing our elections here in the United States by Russia, Iran, North Korea, the Chinese, right? These things remain serious threats to our election systems because of the misinformation that they spread, the disinformation, the lack of trust in government and institutions that Jim Martyr insists on stirring here, these vague allegations of fraud, vague allegations of schemes, these mystery ballots that he alleges happening in our community. He has no facts, he has no proof. And all it does is it weakens people's trust that when they cast their vote, it will be counted. We have secure elections here in Illinois, and we encourage everyone who is eligible to go vote. You can go vote beginning September 26th. Now, I do want to say that MAGA extremists in the Congress have tried to cut funding from key agencies that support our election security, key agencies that protect us from foreign influence. These agencies like CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. It's part of their extreme agenda as outlined in Trump's Project 2025. Okay, and so we have a choice to make in this election, but I just want to affirm that our elections are secure. Throughout my time in Congress, I have worked in a bipartisan way to provide for working families, to make sure that we can lower costs, to defend our freedoms. I've had 18 pieces of legislation signed into law by both President Trump and President Biden. I'm going to continue to do my work to be accessible, transparent, and responsive. That's the promise I made to our community when I was first sworn in 2019. And I am honored to be able to be your voice in Washington. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That concludes today's interview. We appreciate the time that both Jim Marder and Congresswoman Lauren Underwood spent with us. They're candidates for the Congress in the 14th Congressional District, with the election day on November 5th and early voting starting very soon. We thank them for their time, and thank you for watching, and we hope you make use of the Daily Herald as part of your candidate research. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
participating.